Mr. DeLeon, your new fence appears to be encroaching on the common area view corridor by 6 inches. This is a formal inspection. The voice was as sterile and clipped as the manicured boxwoods lining the walkway. Marcus DeLeon looked up from the post-hole digger, his hands gritty with soil, his back aching from a long morning's work. 2 figures stood on the edge of his lawn, a stark intrusion against the peaceful Saturday tableau. The first was Gloria Empson, president of the Pine Hollow Villas Homeowners Association, a woman who moved through the world as if it were a poorly organized pantry in constant need of her attention. She held a clipboard like a scepter, her eyes narrowed with the practiced scrutiny of a tax auditor. Beside her, clutching a bright yellow tape measure, was Stan, a perpetually nervous member of the Architectural Control Committee ACC. He offered Marcus a weak, apologetic smile that did nothing to soften the institutional chill of Gloria's presence. Marcus slowly straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. He was a man accustomed to precision, to checklists and tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. But this was different. This was his yard, his home. "Gloria," he said, his voice even and calm. "Stan, the fence posts are 2 feet inside my property line. I had the lot surveyed last month before I started." Gloria made a dismissive clicking sound with her tongue. "The survey is irrelevant. Mr. DeLeon, the issue is not the property line, but the visual line. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions the CC&Rs you agreed to when you purchased your home are quite clear about the preservation of view corridors. Stan jumped, fumbling with the tape measure. He shuffled forward onto the grass, his loafers sinking slightly into the soft turf. "We, just need to take a quick measurement from the common area sidewalk to the post," he mumbled, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Marcus watched as Stan unspooled the tape, the metal tongue flicking out and catching the sunlight. The act felt absurdly invasive, a clinical violation of the quiet sanctuary he was trying to build. He didn't move. He simply stood, his posture a study in stillness, a habit learned over 20 years in the Air Force, where reacting without thinking was the fastest way to make a fatal mistake. He let them perform their little ritual. Gloria dictated numbers as Stan called them out, her pen scratching across the paper on her clipboard with officious finality. 6 1/8 inches into the designated setback. Duly noted. She looked up, her expression a mask of feigned regret. "You understand. Of course, we have to be consistent. If we let one unapproved modification slide, the entire aesthetic harmony of the community could unravel." Marcus pulled off his work gloves, clapping them together to shake off the dirt. He had seen this performance before. Directed at other neighbors over trivial matters, the wrong shade of beige on a front door. A basketball hoop left out 30 minutes past dusk. A garden gnome deemed thematically inconsistent. He had always stayed out of it, subscribing to the belief that the best way to handle neighborhood drama was to be invisible. But now, the drama had arrived on his lawn, clipboard and tape measure in hand. "I see," Marcus said, his voice betraying no emotion. "Could you please cite the specific rule you believe this violates?" Gloria's smile tightened. It was a test, and she knew it. Most residents wilted under the first show of authority. "Of course," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "as I'm sure you'll find when you review your copy of the governing documents. CC&R Section 8, Subsection 4, Paragraph 2 explicitly prohibits any structure that impedes a view corridor as designated on the community master plan." She tapped her clipboard. "You'll be receiving a courtesy notice to halt construction within 24 hours. We can discuss remediation options after that." With a curt nod, she turned and marched back toward the sidewalk, Stan scurrying behind her like a pilot fish. Marcus watched them go. The sun was warm, The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the scent of freshly turned earth filled the air. It was a perfect day, but a cold, familiar stillness had settled over him, the same razor-sharp focus he'd felt seconds before an emergency landing. The world slowing down. The objective becoming crystal clear. This wasn't about 6 1/8 inches of fence. He knew that with absolute certainty. This was about something else entirely. And Gloria Empson had just made a critical error. She had mistaken his desire for peace for an inability to fight. The house at 142 Snapdragon Court was meant to be a quiet harbor, a place to finally drop anchor. After a career spent in the sky, Marcus wanted nothing more than to feel the solid ground beneath his feet. He had retired from the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel and transitioned to flying commercial routes. A calmer, but still nomadic existence. 3 years ago, that life had shattered when his wife, Amelia, lost her battle with a swift and merciless illness. The home they had shared, filled with 2 decades of memories, became an echo chamber of her absence. Every room, every piece of furniture, held a ghost. So he sold it and moved to Pine Hollow Villas, a meticulously planned community that promised tranquility and order. He'd bought the smallest model, a simple 3-bedroom at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, seeking anonymity among the identical tile roofs and perfectly edged lawns. His grief had made him withdrawn, and the structured emptiness of Pine Hollow suited his mood. He flew his roots, came home, and kept to himself. The neighbors were polite but distant, which was exactly how he wanted it. He had no energy for small talk or block parties. His only project, his only connection to Amelia in this new place, was the plan for the backyard. It was a simple plan she had sketched on a napkin one evening years ago. A small, handcrafted cedar fence for privacy, not too high, with a gate leading to a stone patio. Inside, she had drawn a small garden for heirloom tomatoes and a trellis for climbing roses. Her favorite, our sanctuary. She had called it. For 2 years, the napkin sat in a drawer. Marcus couldn't bring himself to look at it. But as the 3rd anniversary of her passing approached, a new feeling began to surface through the fog of loss, a quiet determination to build it. It was the last thing they had designed together. Completing it felt like a final act of love, a way to honor her memory, not with sorrow, but with creation. He'd done everything by the book. He hired a surveyor to mark his property lines to the inch. He submitted the architectural request form to the HOA, complete with Amelia's drawing and detailed material specifications. A week later, he'd received a terse, 1-line email from Prestige Management, the company that ran the HOA's day-to-day operations. ACC request for 142 Snapdragon C is under review. He waited another 2 weeks, heard nothing, and assumed the bureaucratic silence meant he was clear to proceed. He bought the materials and began the slow, therapeutic work of digging the post holes by hand. Now, standing in his half-finished project, the courtesy notice, a crisp white envelope tucked under his doormat, felt like a desecration. He picked it up and went inside. The house was quiet, sterile. He hadn't put up many pictures. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water and opened the envelope. The notice was polite, professionally printed on Prestige Management letterhead. It formally requested he cease and desist all construction activities pending a review of his project's compliance with CC&R for 8.4.2. He pulled up the digital copy of the CC&Rs he'd received at closing, a massive 200-page PDF, and searched for the clause. CC&R for 8.4.2. Architectural modifications affecting common areas, no structure, outbuilding, fence, or other improvement shall be erected on any lot that materially obstructs the line of sight or designated view corridors of an adjacent common area. as defined in the official plat map of the Pine Hollow Villas community. He read it twice. That only applies to common areas. He said to the empty room, "They can't be serious." His fence was squarely on his private lot, a good 10 feet from the manicured strip of grass and sidewalk that constituted the common area. The idea that his modest 4-foot fence could obstruct a view corridor in a flat, suburban cul-de-sac was laughable. He felt a flash of irritation, but it was quickly replaced by a weary resignation. This was Gloria's doing. He barely knew the woman, but he knew her reputation. She had built a petty fiefdom in Pine Hollow, powered by the selective enforcement of arcane rules. What he didn't understand was why she had targeted him. He was the quiet one, the ghost. Then, a memory surfaced, hazy but sharp. The last HOA annual meeting he'd attended, more than a year ago. It was before he had completely retreated into himself. Amelia had been gone for a year and a half, and a neighbor had convinced him to go. It was a contentious meeting. The board was pushing for a costly and unnecessary new landscaping contract. A motion was made to delay the vote for an independent review. It needed a second to proceed. The room was silent. The board led by Gloria, staring down the homeowners. Then a clear, confident voice had cut through the tension. "I second the motion." It was Amelia's best friend, a sharp lawyer named Sarah, who lived 2 streets over. The motion passed, embarrassing Gloria and costing her preferred vendor the contract. Marcus had seen the look on Gloria's face that night, a flash of cold, controlled fury. Sarah had moved away 6 months later, but Gloria wasn't the type to forget. Was this it? A by proxy vendetta? It seemed impossibly petty. He closed the laptop. This was a misunderstanding. He told himself, a bureaucrat's error, inflated by a power-tripping HOA president. He would call the management company on Monday, explain the situation logically, and clear it up. He would not be drawn into a fight. He just wanted to be left alone to build his wife's garden. The following Friday, the certified letter arrived. Marcus was on his way out for a morning run when he saw the notice from the postal carrier stuck to his front door. "We missed you." A trip to the post office was required to sign for a piece of mail. He knew, with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, exactly what it was. An hour later, he sat at his kitchen table, the thick green and white envelope before him. He slid it open with a knife. Inside was not a letter from a person, but a legal document. It was a formal violation notice from the Pine Hollow Villas Homeowners Association, sent via Prestige Management. The language was colder now, stripped of the pretense of courtesy. RE Formal Notice of Violation, CCNR, Ferrar 8.4.2, Property, 142, Snapdragon Court, APN, 481-55-012, Certified Mail Tracking, Nyaraj 70018, 1830, 0001, 4591-2345. Dear Mr. DeLeon, this letter serves as formal notification that you are in violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CCNRs, of the Pine Hollow Villas community, following a formal inspection on October 7th. The Architectural Control Committee ACC has determined that the unapproved fence structure currently under construction on your property encroaches upon the designated common area view corridor, in direct violation of Ferrar 8.4.2. As per the association's governing documents, you are hereby directed to take immediate corrective action. You have 14 calendar days from the date of this notice to either 1. Completely remove the offending structure and restore the lot to its original condition. 2. Submit a revised architectural plan that fully complies with all community guidelines for review by the ACC. Failure to respond or comply within the specified timeframe will result in the levying of monetary fines, starting at $100 per day, and may lead to further enforcement action by the Board of Directors, up to and including the placement of a lien against your property. The last sentence hung in the airless room. A lien against your property. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a threat. The casual, almost lazy rhythm of his quiet life was over. The letter was a declaration of war, signed not by Gloria Memson, but by a faceless entity called the Board of Directors. It was an official act, backed by the legal framework of the HOA, an organization that held a terrifying amount of power over his home, his finances, and his peace of mind. He read the letter again. The cold, bureaucratic words transforming the home he had bought into a mere property, an asset parcel number to be managed and controlled. The sanctuary he was trying to build for Amelia's memory was now an offending structure. The grief that had been a dull, constant ache for 3 years sharpened into something new. A cold, focused anger. They had crossed a line. They had taken his private pain and dragged it into a public fight, wrapping it in legal jargon and certified mail. He stood up and walked to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. The half-dozen cedar posts stood like silent sentinels in the scarred earth. They looked forlorn, a monument to an interrupted dream. He thought of Amelia's sketch, of her easy laugh as she drew the little smiling sun in the corner of the napkin. They had threatened the last piece of her he had left to build. Marcus picked up his phone. He wasn't calling the management company. He was calling Frank. He needed to talk to a pilot, a strategist, someone who understood that when an opponent puts you on a documented timeline, you don't just react. You start your own checklist. Frank, it's Marcus, he said when his old Air Force wingman answered. I've got a situation here. Hostile engagement on the home front. Logic, Marcus believed, was a universal solvent, applied correctly. It could break down any problem into manageable parts. It was this belief that guided his initial strategy. He would dismantle the HOA's position with simple, irrefutable facts. His first call was to Prestige Management. He navigated the automated phone tree and was eventually connected to a woman named Brenda in the compliance department. Her voice was a practiced monotone, designed to absorb and deflect emotion. Yes, Mr. DeLeon, I have your file right here, she said after he explained the situation. It shows a formal violation notice was issued for a CC&R violation, Section 8.4.2. I understand that, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. But the violation is based on a misinterpretation of the rule. Section 8.4.2 only applies to structures affecting common areas. My fence is entirely on my private lot, as confirmed by a licensed surveyor. There was a pause, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. The rule refers to the obstruction of a view corridor from the common area. Sir, the ACC's determination is that the structure, regardless of its placement on your lot, impedes that view. The finding is consistent with the governing documents. It was like talking to a machine. Every argument he made was met with a canned response that looped back to the same conclusion the committee had made its determination. Brenda, can I speak to the committee, or to the board, or to anyone who can actually apply reason to this, instead of just reading from a script? All communication with the board must be in writing. She recited, "You can submit your position via the homeowner portal. The board will review it at their next scheduled meeting. In the meantime, the 14-day compliance window remains in effect." The call ended. Marcus felt a surge of frustration. The system wasn't designed for resolution. It was designed for attrition. It was a maze of bureaucratic firewalls intended to exhaust homeowners into submission. His next attempt was direct action. The monthly HOA board meeting was that Wednesday evening. He would go and use the 3-minute open forum for homeowners to speak his case directly to the board. He prepared his points, printed a copy of his survey map, and arrived at the community clubhouse 15 minutes early. The room was sparsely attended. Gloria Emson sat at the head of a long table, flanked by the other 4 board members. She ran the meeting with a quiet, masterful command of procedural rules, using motions and points of order to glide through the agenda. When the time came for the homeowner forum, she looked out at the small audience. Our first registered speaker is Mrs. Henderson regarding the new pet waste stations. Marcus waited. After Mrs. Henderson finished, Gloria looked at her list, seeing no other registered speakers. We will now move to... Excuse me, Marcus said. Standing up? I'd like to speak. Gloria looked at him, her expression one of mild surprise. Have you registered to speak, Mr. DeLeon? No. I wasn't aware I needed to. I'd like to use my 3 minutes to address the violation notice I received. She gave a small, sympathetic sigh. I'm afraid that's not possible, as per the meeting rules, which are posted on the community website. Residents wishing to speak must submit their topic in writing to management at least 48 hours in advance, so it can be properly added to the agenda. This ensures our meetings run efficiently. We'd be happy to add you to the list for next month's meeting. Next month. His 14-day deadline would be long past. He would already be incurring daily fines. He looked at the other board members. 2 were studying their notes intently. Another was examining his cuticles. None of them would meet his eye. They were all completely under her thumb. So the board can issue a legal threat with a 2-week deadline. But the homeowner has to wait a month to respond in person. He asked the room. Gloria's voice became edged with steel. Mr. DeLeon, you are out of order. This is not a debate. If you have a dispute, you must follow the established procedures. She banged her gavel lightly. Now, moving on to the treasurer's report. Marcus sat down, the survey map in his hand feeling useless. He had come armed with logic and facts, assuming a rational discussion. But this wasn't a rational forum. It was a carefully controlled performance. And he didn't have a part in the script. He had underestimated his opponent. Gloria wasn't just a bully. She was a master of the bureaucratic weapons she had at her disposal. She had built a fortress of rules and procedures. And he was on the outside, shouting at the walls. He stayed for the rest of the meeting, a silent observer, watching how she skillfully guided every vote, how she tabled inconvenient questions, and how she controlled the flow of information. He left the clubhouse that night with a cold, clear realization to win this fight. He couldn't just be right. He had to be better prepared, better armed, and more strategic than she was. The logical approach had failed. It was time for an intelligence-gathering operation. The next morning, Marcus found his new ally by the community mailboxes. Eleanor Vance was a woman in her late 70s, with piercing blue eyes and a posture that defied her age. She was wrestling with a package that had been crammed into her small mailbox. "Damn these new delivery drivers," she muttered. No respect for the physics of cardboard. Marcus, checking his own empty box, stepped over. "Need a hand." Eleanor. Marcus, "Dear, if you could. My arthritis is speaking French today." He gently worked the package free as he handed it to her. She gave him a shrewd look. "I saw you at the meeting last night. You looked like you'd just been told your flight was canceled." Marcus managed a wry smile. "Something like that. I tried to reason with the board. It was unproductive." "Reason?" Eleanor snorted. "My dear boy. Trying to reason with Gloria Emson is like trying to teach a cat to file tax returns. A waste of time, and you're likely to get scratched." She patted his arm. I heard what she's doing to you over that fence. It's nonsense. Classic Gloria. She finds one ambiguous clause in that bloated book of rules and builds an empire on it. Marcus felt a small weight lift. He wasn't alone. You seem to know the system well. I was a paralegal for a title insurance company for 40 years, she said, her eyes twinkling. I've seen every dirty trick developers, lawyers, and petty tyrants can pull with property documents. The secrets, Marcus, are never in the rules they wave in your face. They're in the documents they hope you never think to look for. An idea began to form in his mind. Eleanor, he said slowly, would you be willing to have a cup of coffee? I have a feeling you're the expert I need. That afternoon, they sat at Marcus's kitchen table, which was now covered in documents. Marcus had laid out his surveyor's map, the violation notice, and the pages of the CC&Rs he'd printed. Eleanor, perched on her chair like a hawk, peered at them through her reading glasses. Okay, first things first, she said, tapping the violation notice. They cited 8.4.2, which hinges on the definition of common area and the location of this designated view corridor. They're betting you don't know what those things legally are. And you do. I know where to find out, she corrected. The CC&Rs are just a contract. The document with real legal teeth is the subdivision plat map, the official one, filed with the county recorder's office when Pine Hollow was first developed. That's the map that legally defines every lot, every common area, every easement. It's the constitution of this place. Gloria's little community plan is just commentary. Her words were a revelation. Marcus had been fighting on Gloria's terms, using her documents. Eleanor was showing him a different battlefield entirely. Their investigation began in earnest. Eleanor showed Marcus how to use the county's public records website. They submitted official requests under the state's HOA laws for documents the board was required to provide the past 5 years of board meeting minutes and the association's financial statements. Frank, his old Air Force buddy, became his remote tactical advisor. Good. You've got ground intel, Frank said over the phone. Now organize it. Create a timeline of every communication. Date every document. You're building an evidence locker. Let them keep making moves. The more they harass you, the more they document their own pattern of behavior. Following Frank's advice, Marcus began a new file. A few days later, another letter from Prestige Management arrived, this one not certified. It was a fine for $50. His offense, his trash and recycling bins, had been visible from the street until 11 a.m. on trash day. The rules stated they must be stored out of sight by 9 a.m. He'd been 5 minutes late bringing them in after his morning run. It was a petty, targeted jab, and he knew it. He paid the fine immediately, scanned the letter and the receipt, and added them to his evidence file. It was a pattern of harassment. The documents from the HOA arrived a week later in a large digital file. The financial statements were dense, but one thing stood out: the exorbitant amounts paid to a single landscaping company, Greenscape Solutions, the very company whose contract Amelia's friend Sarah had questioned at that meeting a year ago. The meeting minutes were even more revealing, mostly for what they didn't say. Entire sections discussing ACC decisions were redacted, blacked out with the digital justification redacted pursuant to attorney-client privilege. Privilege. My foot. Eleanor scoffed, peering at the screen. They're hiding something. Probably a dozen decisions where they let friends of the board slide on violations. But we can't prove it with this. The real prize came the next day. Eleanor called him, her voice crackling with excitement. Marcus, get down to the county recorder's office. I pulled the index number online. The original plat map and the master deed for Pine Hollow Villas are available for public viewing. I'll meet you there. in the hushed, fluorescent-lit basement of the county building. A clerk brought them a heavy, bound volume and a long cardboard tube. They unrolled the tube on a large table. It was the original Mylar plat map of Pine Hollow Villas. Dated 12 years ago, it was a beautiful, intricate document, with every lot, street, and parcel of land drawn with an architect's precision. Eleanor ran a practiced finger along the lines. Okay, here we are. Snapdragon Court. Here's your lot. 142. She traced its boundaries. And here, she said, her voice dropping, is the common area, a 10-foot strip along the street. Exactly what your surveyor showed. But what about the view corridor? Marcus asked. Eleanor scanned the entire sheet, her finger moving from the legend to the notes in the margins. She then opened the heavy deed book, flipping through pages of dense legal text that described every public easement and restriction on the land. After 10 minutes of silent reading, she looked up, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "It's not here," she said, her voice a loud whisper in the quiet room. "There is no such thing as a designated view corridor in the legally filed, binding documents for this community. It doesn't exist." Marcus stared at her. "Then what has Gloria been citing?" "An invention," Eleanor said, tapping the map. "A policy, an unwritten rule she's been enforcing as if it were law. It has no legal standing. None." It was the breakthrough they needed. The foundation of the HOA's case was a fiction. But as Marcus's eyes drifted across the map, tracing the lines around the other homes in the cul-de-sac, he saw something else. It was a thin, dotted line cutting across the corner of a property at the far end of the street. Lot 128, Gloria Emson's house. He pointed. "What's that?" Eleanor leaned in, adjusting her glasses. "Well, I'll be," she breathed. "That, my boy, is a PUE, a public utility easement, for drainage and sewer access, 10 feet from her rear property line, and according to this map." She pulled a small ruler from her purse and made a quick measurement against the map's scale. Her patio, the one with that big, fancy brick pizza oven, extends a good 5 feet into it. The pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. Gloria's own property was in clear. Undeniable violation of a real, recorded easement. Her crusade against his fence, his minor. Non-existent violation was a preemptive strike. She couldn't risk the precedent of a new structure in the cul-de-sac inviting scrutiny, because any official review of the area's property lines might eventually lead back to her own illegal patio. It wasn't just a grudge. It was hypocrisy, buttressed by a desperate need for self-preservation. "She's not just a bully," Marcus said softly. "She's a fraud." "And we've got the map to prove it," Eleanor finished, rolling up the plat map with a decisive snap. They had the truth. They had the evidence. For a brief, exhilarating moment, Marcus felt like the fight was already won. He envisioned a quiet, decisive victory where he simply presented the plat map to the board and watched their case crumble into dust. But Gloria was a more cunning adversary than he had anticipated. Word of his and Eleanor's trip to the county recorder's office must have traveled fast in the small world of Pine Hollow. Perhaps Stan, the nervous ACC member, had seen them together and reported back. Whatever the source, the HOA's next move was swift and aggressive. 2 days after their discovery, an email from Prestige Management landed in Marcus's inbox. The subject line was stark: "Notice of hearing. Executive session." The email informed him that, due to the ongoing and unresolved nature of the violation at his property, the board of directors had scheduled a special hearing to consider the immediate imposition of fines and other enforcement measures. The hearing was in 3 days. crucially. It was designated as an executive session, meaning it would be a closed-door meeting, attended only by Marcus and the board. There would be no public audience, no homeowner forum, no chance for him to present his findings to the community. It was a brilliant tactical move. Gloria was cutting him off, isolating him from his neighbors, and accelerating the timeline to force his hand before the public annual homeowners meeting, which was still 3 weeks away. That meeting was the large, open forum where he had planned to make his stand. Now, she was dragging him into a small private room where she controlled the proceedings entirely. "She knows we have something," Eleanor said, her voice grim. When Marcus forwarded her the email, "She's trying to preempt our attack by getting the fines officially on the books in a closed session. Once the fines are assessed by a board vote, they become a debt. It's much harder to fight them after the fact." The pressure mounted. The carefully constructed timeline he and Frank had discussed was now in shambles. He was being railroaded. That evening, as he was processing the news, he saw something that hardened his resolve. He was walking his cul-de-sac at dusk when he saw Gloria standing in the front yard of Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who lived 3 doors down. Mrs. Gable was in a wheelchair, and a simple wooden ramp, weathered and unobtrusive, led to her front door. Marcus was close enough to hear the tail end of their conversation. The variance was granted by a previous board. "Gloria," Mrs. Gable was saying, her voice thin but firm. "It was approved years ago. And this board has the authority to review all existing variances," Gloria replied, her tone cloyingly sweet but underlined with menace. "We're just making sure everything is up to code. It would be a shame if your ramp was found to be non-compliant after all this time. You'll be at the annual meeting, won't you? Dorothy, I trust you'll be voting in support of the current board's initiatives." The threat was unmistakable, a piece of cruel, political blackmail. Gloria was using Mrs. Gable's wheelchair ramp, her lifeline to the outside world, as leverage to secure her vote and ensure her silence. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. This fight was no longer just about his fence or Gloria's hypocrisy. It was about people like Mrs. Gable, who were too vulnerable to fight back against this kind of systematic abuse. He turned back toward his house before they could see him, his mind racing. He couldn't let Gloria win in that executive session. He had to find a way to drag this fight back into the light. He spent the next hour on the phone with Eleanor. Their strategy shifted. The executive session was a trap, but it was also an opportunity. "Don't present your full case there," Eleanor advised. "Don't show her the plat map. Don't mention her patio. That's your trump card for the annual meeting. If you show your hand now, she'll have 3 weeks to invent a defense. You go to her meeting. You listen. You be respectful. And you formally request that. Given the complex nature of the dispute involving official county records, the matter be tabled until it can be presented with full documentation at the upcoming annual meeting, where all homeowners can be privy to the facts." "She'll say no," Marcus predicted. "Of course she will," Eleanor said. "But you will have made the request on the record. You will have it documented in the minutes of that session. You'll be the reasonable one, asking for transparency. She'll be the one insisting on a closed-door judgment. We're not trying to win in her star chamber. We're building a case for the real trial, in the court of public opinion at the annual meeting." It was a risky gambit. He would have to attend the hearing, face Gloria and her compliant board, and walk out with fines likely levied against him, all while keeping his best evidence hidden. It felt like flying blind into a storm, trusting his instruments while every instinct screamed to pull up. But he knew Eleanor was right. This wasn't about a quick victory. It was about a permanent one. He had to let Gloria overplay her hand. The executive session was held in a small, windowless conference room in the back of the clubhouse. The air was stale. Marcus sat at one end of a polished table. At the other end, arranged like an inquisitorial panel, sat Gloria and the 4 other board members. A representative from Prestige Management, the same emotionless Brenda from the phone, was present to take the official minutes. Gloria began the proceedings with a solemnity better suited to a national security briefing. This executive session of the Pine Hollow Villas Board of Directors is now called to order. The sole purpose of this hearing is to address the ongoing non-compliance of Mr. Marcus DeLeon at 142 Snapdragon Court regarding violation notice VI 2023-D47. She methodically recounted the events: the courtesy notice, the formal violation, Marcus's failure to comply. She presented the board with a packet of documents, which included photos of his fence posts and a crudely drawn map of the cul-de-sac with a thick red line indicating the supposed view corridor. It was a compelling performance of due process, a pantomime of fairness. "Mr. DeLeon," she said, turning to him, "you have been given ample opportunity to rectify this situation. Do you have anything to say before the board votes on the imposition of fines?" This was his moment. He took a slow breath, channeling the calm he had learned in countless flight simulators. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I have reviewed the violation and the cited rule, and I have conducted my own research into the matter. My research includes a review of the official, publicly recorded plat map and master deed for this community, filed with the county." He saw a flicker of something in Gloria's eyes, not quite panic, but a tightening, a loss of her perfect composure. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. This research has raised significant legal questions about the very existence of the view corridor cited in the violation. He continued, "Therefore, I would like to formally request that the board table this matter until the upcoming annual meeting in 3 weeks. This will allow me sufficient time to prepare and present my full documentation to both the board and the community at large, ensuring a transparent and fair resolution for all parties." He had delivered his lines perfectly. He was reasonable, respectful, and had invoked the powerful words legal questions and transparency. There was a heavy silence. Gloria stared at him, her mind clearly working. She could not afford to let this spill into a public forum. "That will not be necessary," she said, her voice dangerously smooth. "The board has been presented with all the relevant information from the ACC. Your research, as you call it, is outside the scope of this hearing. The purpose of this session is not to debate the merits of the CC&Rs, but to enforce them. We are here to vote on the fines for your non-compliance." She turned to the board. "I move that we impose the standard fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the expiration of the 14-day compliance period, and continuing until the violation is cured. Do I have a second?" One of the board members, a man who had not said a word, immediately muttered, "Second." "All in favor?" 4 hands went up in unison. The 5th board member, a newer resident, hesitated for a split second before her hand slowly rose as well. "The motion carries. 5-0, Gloria declared, a thin smile of victory on her lips. She had won. She had gotten the fines on the record. She had beaten him. Brenda from Prestige Management made a note. "The fines are officially levied as of this date." Marcus stood up. He had lost the battle. Just as he and Eleanor had predicted, he now officially owed the HOA hundreds of dollars, a figure that would grow with each passing day. But as he looked at Gloria's triumphant face, he knew he had accomplished his real mission. He had seen her hand. She was so terrified of what he might have found that she had bulldozed her own board into a premature, closed-door judgment. She had chosen control over the appearance of fairness, and that, he knew, would be her undoing. "Thank you for your time," he said calmly, and walked out of the room, leaving them to the stale air and their hollow victory. The race to the annual meeting was on. He was now armed not only with the truth, but with proof of the board's unwillingness to hear it. The clubhouse was packed, every seat was taken, and a line of homeowners stood along the back wall. The annual meeting, usually a dull, sparsely attended affair, had become the hottest ticket in Pine Hollow. Whispers of the closed-door hearing and Marcus's escalating fines had circulated through the neighborhood, fanned by carefully placed, anonymous flyers that had appeared on doorsteps, overnight flyers that simply asked, "What is our HOA hiding in executive session?" Marcus sat in the front row, a laptop bag at his feet. Eleanor gave him a reassuring nod from a few seats away. Mrs. Gable was near the back, looking small and anxious. Gloria, presiding over the meeting, seemed energized by the large crowd, mistaking the community's anxiety for engagement. She moved briskly through the agenda, her control of the proceedings absolute. Finally, she arrived at the homeowner open forum. "We have one registered speaker tonight," she announced, her voice resonating with false magnanimity. "Mr. Marcus DeLeon, who has requested time to discuss community architectural standards. Mr. DeLeon, you have 5 minutes." A large digital timer was projected on the screen behind her, its red numbers glowing B500. Marcus walked to the podium, connected his laptop to the projector, and took a deep breath. The timer started its silent, inexorable countdown. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and steady, amplified by the microphone. "My name is Marcus DeLeon, 142 Snapdragon Court. I'm here tonight to talk about fairness, transparency, and the importance of basing community decisions on facts, not fiction." He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was a high-resolution scan of his formal violation notice, with the words CCNR Frere 8.4.2 highlighted in yellow. U445. 3 weeks ago, I was ordered to halt construction on a privacy fence and was subsequently fined by this board for violating Section 8.4.2 of our CCNRs. The board claimed my fence, which is on my private property, violated a common area view corridor. He clicked again. The next slide showed the full text of FRERE 8.4.2 alongside the legal definitions of private lot and common area taken directly from the CCNRs. Duro 410. As you can see, this rule applies only to the obstruction of a common area. It is the foundational basis for the board's entire action against me. The question, then, is simple. What are the legally defined common areas in our community? A murmur went through the room. Gloria watched him, her expression unreadable. He clicked to the third slide. The room fell silent. Projected in crisp, undeniable detail was the official Pine Hollow Villas plat map from the county recorder's office. A bright red arrow pointed to his lot. 0330. "This," Marcus said, his voice ringing with authority, "is not a community map. This is the legal survey document that governs every square inch of Pine Hollow. As you can clearly see, my property line is here. A laser pointer dot appeared on the screen, and the common area is here. My fence is located entirely on my private lot. And as for the alleged view corridor," he swept the laser pointer across the entire map. "It does not exist on this document, because it is not a legal reality. It is a fiction, created and selectively enforced by this board." The whispers grew louder. People were turning to look at Gloria, whose face had hardened into a pale mask. 0250. When I attempted to present this evidence to the board in a closed hearing, They refused to consider it and voted unanimously to fine me anyway. Which begs the question, why would the board ignore official county records? Perhaps because a close look at the plat map reveals other, more significant issues. Click. The fourth slide. The plat map was now zoomed in on the other end of the cul-de-sac. Another red arrow appeared, pointing directly at Lot 128, Gloria Emson's property. The dotted line of the public utility easement was highlighted in bright yellow, and a photo inset showed her sprawling patio and brick pizza oven clearly built over it.
No duionel.
A collective gasp swept the room. It was undeniable. A clear, documented violation. Far more serious than offense on a private lot. This is a real violation of a recorded easement, Marcus stated, his voice devoid of accusation, letting the evidence speak for itself. And this leads to my final point. Enforcement of our rules must be consistent and fair. It cannot be used as a tool to protect some while targeting others. That brings us to the matter of architectural variances. He paused, his eyes finding Mrs. Gable in the back of the room. He saw the fear on her face, the dread of being singled out, of having her private struggles made public. His presentation was timed perfectly. He had another minute and a half. He could detail the veiled threat he had overheard. He could expose Gloria's blackmail and crush her completely. The evidence of her patio was a cannonball. Exposing her cruelty to a widow in a wheelchair would be the grape shot that followed. The red numbers on the screen flipped to 0130. He took a breath. This was the moment. The moment to choose between total victory and simple justice. He thought of Amelia, of the sanctuary they had planned. It was meant to be a place of peace. There are residents in our community, he said, his voice softening, who have been granted variances in the past for critical needs, things like accessibility modifications. He did not look at Mrs. Gable. He looked at the board. These variances are a testament to the fact that Pine Hollow was once a community that valued compassion over rigid enforcement. My final recommendation tonight is that this body of homeowners pass a motion to formally reaffirm all previously granted architectural variances for accessibility. We must protect our most vulnerable residents from the fear that their needs might be used as a political weapon. He had done it. He made his point without naming her, turning a personal attack into a principled stand for the entire community. He had sacrificed the killing blow for something more important.
Nurzir, 50s.
My time is almost up. I ask that the board immediately rescind my fines, approve my fence as submitted, and I urge my fellow homeowners to demand a full, independent audit of all ACC decisions from the last 5 years.
Dorzone 03.
He looked directly at Gloria, whose face was a mixture of shock and dawning realization. She had expected a brawl. He had given her a quiet, lethal dissection.
0
The timer flashed 0. Marcus turned off the microphone. Thank you. The room did not just erupt. It detonated. The carefully managed order of Gloria's meeting shattered into 100 angry conversations. People were on their feet, shouting questions at the board, pointing at the damning image of Gloria's patio still projected on the screen. Is that true? A man in the back yelled. Is the president's patio in violation? A point of order, Gloria shouted, banging her gavel uselessly against the cacophony. This is not on the agenda. But she had lost control. Eleanor Vance stood up, her voice cutting through the noise with the sharp authority of a seasoned litigator. I make a motion from the floor, she called out. I move for a third party. Independent forensic audit of all ACC decisions and financial expenditures for the past 5 years. Second, yelled 3 people at once. You can't do that, Gloria protested, her voice rising in panic. A motion from the floor requires a majority vote to be heard. Then let's vote, someone shouted. A sea of hands shot into the air. It was overwhelmingly in favor. The board members looked at each other, their loyalty to Gloria evaporating in the face of a homeowner revolt. The motion was added to the agenda. The vote to approve it was a mere formality. Another homeowner stood. I move that the board immediately table all fines and enforcement actions against Mr. Marcus de Leon, pending the results of the audit. Second. The motion passed with another deafening chorus of ayes. Marcus's fines were gone. The threat against his property was neutralized. But it didn't stop there. The board, now visibly shaken and desperate to distance themselves from their president, was hammered with questions. The hesitant board member who had been the last to vote for Marcus's fines suddenly found her voice. I would like to make a motion, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I move for a formal censure of President Mempson for a clear conflict of interest in pursuing an enforcement action, while her own property remains in violation of a recorded easement. Gloria stared at her, betrayed. You work for me, she mouthed silently. The motion was seconded. It, too, passed. Gloria Mempson, who had entered the meeting as the untouchable queen of Pine Hollow, was now a pariah at her own table, formally condemned by the very board she had so carefully controlled. She sat stunned and silent as the rest of the meeting was conducted around her, a deposed monarch forced to watch her kingdom be dismantled. As the meeting finally, chaotically, adjourned, Marcus was surrounded. Neighbors he had never spoken to clapped him on the shoulder, shaking his hand, thanking him. We knew something was wrong. One said, we just didn't know how to fight it. Mrs. Gable made her way through the crowd, her eyes shining with tears. She reached out and took his hand. Thank you, she whispered. You spoke for those of us who couldn't. Marcus simply nodded, a profound sense of relief washing over him. It was a victory, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the restoration of order, the rebalancing of a system that had been tipped too far into tyranny. He looked across the room and saw Gloria slipping out a side door. Alone. In the weeks that followed, Pine Hollow Villas transformed. The independent audit moved forward with ruthless efficiency, stripped of her power. Gloria Mempson became a ghost in her own neighborhood. Her patio, the symbol of her hypocrisy, was partially demolished within a week to bring it into compliance with the easement, a noisy and public humiliation. Marcus, reluctantly at first, agreed to chair a new ad hoc committee tasked with rewriting the community's architectural guidelines. With Eleanor at his side, he led a series of open, collaborative workshops, crafting a new set of rules based on clarity, reason, and fairness. The era of weaponized ambiguity was over. He finished his fence. The simple cedar structure stood proudly in his backyard, a quiet monument, not to a fight, but to a promise kept. He planted the climbing roses and the heirloom tomatoes, and, as he worked the soil, he felt the heavy weight of the past 3 years begin to lift. The backyard was no longer a memorial to what he had lost, but a sanctuary for what he was building anew. The final surprise, the last ghost in the machine, was flushed out by the audit. The report was delivered at a special meeting 3 months after the explosive annual meeting. The auditors had uncovered a pattern that went beyond simple mismanagement. They found a secret, undocumented agreement between Gloria Mempson and Prestige Management. For years, in exchange for Gloria aggressively pushing their preferred, high-priced vendors for every major community project from greenscape solutions to roofers to paving contractors, Prestige Management had been secretly waiving Gloria's personal monthly HOA dues. The total kickback amounted to thousands of dollars. She wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a corrupt one, enriching herself at the expense of her neighbors. The revelation was the final nail in the coffin. Prestige Management's contract was terminated by a unanimous homeowner vote. A new, local management company was hired, one chosen by a homeowner committee for its transparency. The board, thoroughly disgraced, saw 2 members resign immediately. A recall election was held, and a new board, with Eleanor Vance as its president, was swept into power on a platform of reform. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus sat on his new patio, sipping a cup of coffee. He looked at the sturdy fence, the thriving rose bushes, and the green tomatoes slowly ripening on the vine. He had come to Pine Hollow seeking solitude, and had found a community instead. He had been forced into a fight he never wanted, and, in doing so, had rediscovered the part of himself that knew how to lead, how to strategize, and how to stand for something. He had not only built Amelia's garden, he had weeded one that had threatened to choke the entire neighborhood. He heard the distant, familiar drone of a plane overhead, climbing high into the blue sky, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly, completely at peace.